now on to our final speaker of today, who we are thrilled to have join us here. Frank Starling joins us today from Lions, where he's the VP Chief DEI Officer. Frank's global DE&I strategy is helping to create a more equitable business which puts inclusive thinking at the heart of the organisation. In 2020, Frank was recognised as one of the UK's prominent black figures by Operation Black Vote, Oxford University and the House of Commons Pathway to Success programme. Prior to working at Lions, Frank served as CEO of Variety Pack, a consultancy that works with global organisations across sectors to build equitable cultures of trust, psychological safety and inclusion. And he is an alumnus of the Blavatnik School of Government, Oxford University, a certified psychological safety consultant, and holds a DE&I certification from Cornell University. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you. The world is changing. Society is hyper-connected and still fragmented. Generative AI and agentic AI is paving the way for innovation, changing both how we work and eventually how we live. An understanding of unique perspectives and lived experiences, cultures and subcultures has never been more critical, and being representative of global communities is essential for global growth. By 2030, minoritized groups in the US will become the majority. By 2050, Africa's population is expected to reach 2.5 billion, meaning that 1 in 4 global consumers will be African. Disabled people make up 1 in 4 people in the UK. Across Asia and Europe, working age populations are undergoing significant shifts. And with 5 generations in the workforce, there are different sets of values, working styles, and beliefs. And we are less than 5 years away from the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals deadline, with only 35% of assessed targets on track. Customers and colleagues expect inclusive decisions and inclusive leadership, alongside cultural awareness from leading brands. And they will hold them accountable if these standards are not met. Ensuring that they are part of any and every business strategy has become a vital element of staying relevant in any global organization. It's a strategic imperative essential for the health of our society, allowing us to relate to a better and ever-changing world. I'm Frank Starling, VP and Chief DEI Officer at Lions. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a tall, brown-skinned man. I'm 6'8", in case you wondered. I'm wearing a navy suit, burgundy shoes, got black afro hair, along with a gold Casio watch. I'm responsible for evolving and embedding our global DEI strategy at Lions to create a more equitable business and put inclusive thinking at the heart of our organization. My other hats include serving as a judge for the Tech Women 100, which was founded by Vanessa Vallely, which celebrates women in tech talent and recognizes the impact of champions and companies and networks that are leading the future of generations of tech talent. I'm also an advisory council member for the EPIC Public Information Collaborative, or the Earth Public Information Collaborative, aka EPIC, and that collaborates with some of the world's largest brands and leading creative agencies to harness the power of global communications to inspire action at scale. So, what does bridging relevance, resonance, and impact mean? Let's start with relevance. Are we relevant to our customers and colleagues? Accenture's research reveals a critical perception gap. 68% of leaders believe they're creating an empowering and inclusive culture, where only 36% of employees actually agree with that, which is stifling innovation and creativity. Closing this gap requires leaders to prioritize culture. They are the culture makers, after all. They have the ability to be the culture makers. And the outcome represents an opportunity of over $1 trillion. So there's a chance to drive growth, but also drive inclusion at the same time. And our relevance needs to be both to our customers and our colleagues by holding space to listen, to align with their experiences, as well as the willingness to have uncomfortable conversations? What about resonance? That starts with avoiding assumptions, challenging those long-held stereotypes, and instead working in step with communities to co-design better outcomes that are centered on cultural integrity. And impact, well, that's acknowledging that systemic barriers exist for many global communities. They don't just evaporate. They're integrated into our systems, into our processes. And there's an opportunity and maybe a responsibility for organizations to break those barriers. Acronyms versus actions. Over the last few years, we've had an excessive focus on terminology, which in some cases, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, has led to a fear of getting it wrong, of saying the wrong thing, of going down the wrong path. How we refer to initiatives or impact can at times make or break their effectiveness. But let's remember that acronyms, although useful and important, a focus on actions is really where we should spend our time. From a recent report from Catalyst and the Meltzer Center, 78% of C-suite leaders and 83% of legal leaders say they are rebranding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, such as employee engagement, workplace culture, fairness, or even belonging. And a lot of that is driven by fear, it's driven by change in policy, the want to be compliant with those changes. But 62% of C-suite leaders and 60% of legal leaders say their company is either increasing or not changing their investment in DE&I. So even though the global sentiment may feel like there is a mass regression in terms of how we are supporting these programs, internally within many brands, they're going through a kind of a rehash on how they talk about these things externally. So whether you use DEI, DOI, JEDI, we use ERA, or simply inclusion, focusing on impactful actions over high volume will yield results, choosing impact over volume. Here's an example. I might be part of a community where sharing language and tradition is at the heart of my belief system. Creating impact could involve a brand utilizing its technology to assist with that process without being extractive, by finding ways to be helpful and additive to that community in a meaningful way. Take the popular game Hidden, which is a Singapore-based company that creates immersive app experiences. They're working directly with indigenous Maori communities, gamifying their stories and heritage of Maori culture in New Zealand. Players follow clues via WhatsApp to discover locations and unlock historical and cultural narratives, promoting connection with Maori culture through interactive experiences and bringing previously hidden stories to light in the landscape. That's impact. By championing inclusion, we attract all potential customers, enhance brand equity, enhance trust, engage more authentically with our colleagues, and have the potential to create lasting community impact. Hands up if you've heard the word or phrase psychological safety before. Something you're familiar with. My Lions colleagues are probably tired of me repeating it. In essence, it means whether one can share their thoughts and perspectives without being perceived as ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative. If psychological safety focuses on creating a safe environment for people to contribute, then it needs to be paired with curiosity and a sense of permission to speak up, almost kind of permission for candor. We all have a different story. We have a different starting point in life, and our differences enrich our ability to understand each other, as it allows us to learn more about experiences that are different from our own. And there's a red thread, which is how do we hold space for each other and actively encourage input from everyone in the room? remembering that not all contrarian opinions are controversial. And a big part of allyship is fostering dialogue despite our differences and choosing to show up in ways which avoid insincere actions. At Lions, our strategy is called ERA, and that stands for Equity, Representation, and Accessibility. And that's underpinned by inclusion. Another acronym for you. We want equity, representation, and accessibility. We want ERA to be at the heart of our organization, the heart of our products, our services, and our events and festivals, underpinned by an inclusive society and one day an inclusive industry that gives back more than it takes. And we've launched or grown several initiatives, one of which is our ERA program. The Cannes Lions Festival happens every year in June, where 10 to 15,000 delegates are in attendance to celebrate creativity and creative marketing that matters. Historically, access to the Cannes Lions Festival, arguably the most visible and prestigious event out there, has been funded by employers for many of the delegates. And a perception has existed that the event primarily targets the most senior industry professionals, potentially overlooking new or historically underrepresented talent in the industry. So we looked to change that. We created the ERA program to remove an access barrier to the festival. We know that we have the highest penetration of senior CMOs that come to the festival every single year. That's a unique opportunity. The festival itself is, if you've ever been, it's a combination of new experiences, a chance to discover and meet new colleagues, a chance to enjoy ourselves, but also a chance to grow in the process. And by launching the ERA program at the festival last year in 2024, we backed €1 million worth of complimentary passes to the festival based on an equitable framework. This year, we brought that back. In 2025, we doubled the allowance to €2 million with a greater focus on the global south. And that's created equitable access. It's created new networks for underrepresented communities to participate, to be part of that conversation and that journey, alongside transforming the representation of the festival. 50% of our delegates identify as underrepresented, a very different story we would have told 10 years ago. See It, Be It is another accelerator program that we're proud of. That focuses on women and non-binary people globally. And over the last 10 years, over 150 individuals have gone through that program. And 63% of our alumni are now serving as creative director or above, surpassing the industry average of 12%. Internally, our focus is on things like psychological safety, creating a culture where everyone can contribute meaningfully, which has led to better innovation and creativity. And also training leaders on inclusive leadership. There's a really great framework out there. Dr. Juliet Burke was the architect of that framework back in 2016 within Deloitte, and it's called the 6 Cs. And as my time as a consultant, I worked with over 30 organizations on DEI. And the two skills gaps that would come up time and time again for leaders in global organizations. The first was a cognizance of their biases. We're faced with 180 different cognitive biases every single day. And leaders often wouldn't take the time to reflect on what their biases may be. And the second skills gap was based on cultural intelligence. Can I adapt my leadership style based on who I'm engaging with? Do I have a good, broad understanding of global communities and the groups that we are serving? So that's a big focus for us because we want to create a culture of fearless teams where everyone, irrespective of who they are, how they choose to identify, can be the best version of themselves. And earlier this year, we released our Lions Impact Report, which provides more of a detailed look and progress at our progress to date, which is on lions.co for anyone interested. I want you to take a minute and think about what makes a good neighbor in your community. Hands up if you've had a bad neighbor. I definitely have. I recently moved house, and luckily my neighbors are good. A good neighbor doesn't assume what others need. They ask. They don't wait for an invitation to help during a crisis. They proactively offer support. You learn your neighbors' names, you understand their community boundaries, you show up when it matters. Most importantly, a good neighbor recognizes that when the whole neighborhood thrives, it benefits everyone. How can we be good neighbors to our communities, to our customers, to our colleagues? For organizations that choose to leverage inclusive policies and inclusive leadership, it presents an opportunity to drive growth while elevating global communities by driving more equitable outcomes. I think that's what everyone is looking for. If we focus on creating impactful initiatives that drive positive change, that can serve business growth but also serve impact at the same time. I can't say that I can relate to every single lived experience out there. I don't know what it means to turn up to work and experience endometriosis. I don't know what it means to have to experience diabetes every single day. I can tell you what it's like to be a parent, to be a carer, to sometimes knowing that people may make assumptions about me because of the melanin in my skin. Genetically, we're 99.9% the same. So we all have different lived experiences out there. And for organizations that choose to leverage inclusive policies and leadership, this presents that unique opportunity to drive growth whilst elevating global communities. So, there are 3 actions I think we can all take to bridge the gap in relevance, resonance, and impact. So we can be good neighbors. I think everyone wants good neighbors. The neighborhood I've just moved into, I'm thankful that to my left and to my right and opposite me, they're great neighbors so far. I've got a 4-year-old, and that's my first concern. What is the neighborhood going to be like? And I think when we consider that, we consider our responsibility to show up for the global communities that we are working with every single day. So my first point, my first action, if you will, is it starts with co-designing with communities. I once worked with the UK Innovation District Group, which represents the largest innovation districts in the UK. And the focus was, how do we create a framework that drives and embeds inclusive innovation? And a center point of that, a linchpin of that framework was co-design. Are we truly representative in the room? Are we working with the communities we serve? Are we bringing them into that conversation? Diversity of thought is a direct result of representation, and representative teams drive better outcomes. So whether we're leveraging ethnographic research, community involvement, co-design in general, they're all crucial for cultural integrity and authenticity, ensuring our approach to business growth remains sharp, but restorative and relevant. This is one of my favorite points. There's a reason I'm an advocate for psychological safety. Organizations with high levels of it across their teams outperform those that don't across every single KPI. And that's based on 25 years of research from Amy Edmondson. But there's another point here. What does it mean to have a sense of belonging? When I go into the workplace, when I joined Lions, I was the first black man on the exec team for 70 years, so in our history. I didn't know what the experience would be like walking into the room for the first time. Luckily, it was friendly and inclusive and welcoming, and that was heartening. That was probably one of the first times I've experienced that. But encouraging intellectual honesty is encouraging people to fill the space with their perspectives and their views. You can create that safe space, but do people feel safe enough to speak up? So alongside psychological safety, we need to encourage candor. And despite how unsettling or uncomfortable conversations may be, people's opinions are still valid. An organizational climate of intellectual honesty means we challenge our inherent biases. Remember, there's over 180 that we're faced with every single day. And we break those echo chambers. In the best case scenario, you receive an idea from someone in the room that drives organizational success. And we never know who might have that single game-changing idea. So we're creating that space in order to foster that innovation and creativity. My third point is fostering authentic inclusion. This is an opportunity to avoid tick boxes. It should focus on actively listening, acknowledging that a challenge is a gift, whilst embedding inclusive thinking into our business strategy. The most senior leader in the room, are they thinking about inclusion? Are they putting that at the center of their decision-making process? For many organizations right now, growth is always going to be on the agenda, but growth and inclusion aren't combating each other. They live in the same house on different floors. We can achieve both of those things at the same time. It's something that Lions is committed to, so we can grow our impact as we grow globally. When we get it right, we embrace our global communities and create fearless teams that foster the circumstances to drive creativity and innovation, sustainable thinking, which in turn drives growth. But we also meet the expectations of our customers and colleagues, and that bar continues to rise. We can feel the generational differences in the workplace, the differences of how we work and our values. So this is an opportunity to change that. Okay, before I wrap up, I want to end with a quote and a call to action. This is from the UN Global Compact. And I think when I share this quote, I hope that you take it with you to really consider what's your one action that you will commit to going forward. And the quote is this: "The framework is here, the urgency is real, and the next move is yours. Companies that act now won't just shape the market, they will shape the future." Thank you. Okay. Great.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly insightful, and I absolutely loved the image of the house that these, things aren't in combat, they're just on different floors in the same house. Are there anyone questions out on the floor? If not, I have one I'd like to start with. So, obviously we're sitting here with a lot of teams from the media, and I sort of wanted to ask how you're seeing the opportunities for inclusion within sort of content and media, whether that's content creation, content dissemination, how you're seeing that developing and changing, and where you'd like to see it go in the next 5 years.
I think going back to that point of that palpable fear of getting it wrong, I think many creative teams right now, that's a strong consideration. How do we get this right? And linking to that point of co-design, that's why I'm such a big advocate for it, because I think bringing people into that process is an opportunity to be authentic. Take languages, global languages as an example. There are 7,000 languages in the world, of which 40% of them are endangered. If I was part of an indigenous community right now, I'm going to have major concerns around the society around me. Climate is going to be a major concern. I'm also going to be concerned about tradition, passing these, passing key elements of our culture on to the next generation. So I think we've got an opportunity just to pause and think about, are we being restorative to those communities in the right kind of way? I think at Cannes Lions this year, many brands are leaning into their inclusion strategy. They're not pulling back in any way. Others are really trying their best to navigate that, especially if they're based in parts of the world or territories in the world where we've seen a shift in legislation. So.
This might be a slightly practical question, but one that I think is probably on the minds of lots of people in these teams is often, you're pushing strategies forward and you're wanting to make change, and someone somewhere will ask you for some numbers. Yeah. And I was just wondering, if you think about how do you measure the impact of your strategy, and if you sort of had to pick a metric, which one do you find most valuable?
Well, if I take the ERA program as an example, when we launched that at the Cannes Lions Festival, it was the first time we'd ever launched a program of that scale it was also the same year, so we're giving away €1 million worth of complimentary passes. It was also the same year that we had a record number of delegates at the festival. So I think there are many different metrics or scorecards out there. But again, going back to that house analogy, how do we ensure that they're working together? So there might be a growth metric and one that stands for inclusion. Let's measure both and see where they meet in the middle, essentially. So.
I did see, yes, if we go to the front and then do that.
Thank you so much for the presentation. There are lots of really fascinating themes, but I'm going to ask a really sort of from the ground up sort of question. Have you got a case study you could describe to us of an actual intervention that's made a difference that those of us working in the media can actually learn from and take something away?
Yeah, a couple. I think based on content or just in general. I mean, look, there's quite a few out there. I think there's one good example of Harvey Mudd College in the US where they were focusing on how do we increase the participation of women within our engineering programs. And what they did was a complete study of the language that they were using. And I don't have all the stats now, but over a 5 year period, they saw an exponential increase in participation of women within their programs. I mean, they structurally changed the outcomes of those programs by thinking about what they're saying and how they engage with those communities directly. So there are many different examples out there. I think it's focused on, what we've seen in the past is programs and initiatives which maybe lack integrity at times. How do we avoid the window dressing and instead look at what are the key components to a strategy for DEI? A big part of that is equity. Is this creating an equitable outcome for the community that we serve, and what is that outcome? Does that answer your question?
The theory is fascinating, but I don't necessarily understand how it relates to practice.
Is there a particular aspect that you'll think? I guess
that's why I was asking about a case study that I could imagine myself being part of, or even just observing.
Yeah, I guess another example would be Microsoft. So during COVID, Microsoft went out with a focus on how do we train our global workforce on what it's like to experience microaggressions in the workplace. And their hypothesis was that you may show up to work every single day, either virtually or in person, and over the course of a given week, you may experience 1 or 2 microaggressions. And a microaggression is an unintentional slight or snub, right? So that could be someone saying something to you which actually sounds quite negative and makes you feel excluded. But there are other people in the workplace that experience tens of microaggressions every single week. They're being asked where you're from. Their seniority is being challenged in the room. So Microsoft went on a journey of training, at the time, over 200,000 employees on this topic of inclusive language, on allyship, on microaggressions. Why that is particularly interesting is that over the course of the next 2 years, that's where they saw exponential growth. So I think what's good about that as an example is if we focus on inclusivity as a workplace, we can also drive growth and we can drive those outcomes. Another, to your point of tangible examples, is Project Aristotle by Google. So back in 2015, they went on a long study to identify what makes an effective team. And they went through years of research. They surveyed their own internal team members, and they came up with a framework that describes effectiveness. And the number one thing on that framework was psychological safety, and that's where they cited Amy Edmondson's research. Microsoft, many years later, actually did a similar study to look at team effectiveness, and again, psychological safety was in the top 3. So I think there are many different examples. Probably it depends on kind of which aspect of DEI one may focus on. But happy to share more information on that. I think the last point I'll mention here, because I think it's very current, is the Meltzer Center of DEI, which is an extension of NYU Law. They have brilliant guidance and resources about the legal challenges related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I always recommend people check out their website, because I think navigating where we are now really involves us being compliant at the same time. So.
Thanks very much for the presentation, Frank. My question, I was really interested in your mentioning of psychological safety, and I was just thinking about how, I think unfortunately, particularly in the United States, but also here and in Europe, DEI has become politicized, and it's increasingly feeling like a sort of an us versus them. You're either with us or you're against us sort of narrative, and I think that's where we came up with the theme for today. So I just wondered whether you could say a bit more about sort of, I guess, how we do that and how we sort of create space for that debate in this sort of increasingly combative, what feels like a combative environment.
Yeah, I think it starts with being curious. You know, do we have a genuine curiosity for perspectives in the room? So functionally, in a meeting, I might be presenting in a meeting. I've got 30 minutes, and I want to leave some time at the end for Q&A. In that meeting, am I serving myself? So am I just presenting the information that I have, or do I have a genuine curiosity for the perspectives and challenges that may follow? So as a leader, it's at the end of that meeting, I could say, does anyone have any questions? And there's silence in the room. No one has anything to say. You know, some may say that's an environment of psychological danger. You know, the alternative is I may get to the end of that meeting and say, well, actually, I'd love to hear your perspectives and your challenges. You know, so let's spend the next 10 minutes. If you'd like to share them now, then please do. If you want to find me after, then shoot me an email. So that curiosity element, I think, is really important. I think the second point I mentioned there is acknowledging that because we all have a different start in life, because we all have a different lived experience, the person I am, when I enter that room, the person I am really determines how included I may feel in that environment. Some people may be part of a company and always feel included. That's all they've ever known. For others, it's the complete opposite. And yet we want every single person in the workplace to thrive. So a consideration of that is, who are we not hearing from? Who are we not necessarily getting perspectives from in the room? And why is that happening? And as a leader, how am I taking it upon myself? It's my responsibility to encourage that environment, to create it, to make sure it's more psychologically safe. So.
We've probably got time for one more question, if there is one, but it looks like we don't. No. Thank you so much for joining us. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thanks so much, Imogen.
So that brings us to the end of Mirrors or Movers for this year. I'm going to say a few words before I release everyone to drinks and a bit of socialising and networking at the end. I need to start with a huge thank you, firstly to Informa for this absolutely beautiful space. It's been a real privilege to be up here. I have spent quite a lot of the day looking out the window, and I'm sure many of you have as well. A massive thank you to our team, especially Miriam, who has managed today over the last few months and really taken on the burden of running it. Huge thank you also to Sonia and Daniel. I think we make a great team, so it's been a really wonderful year to work together. Huge thanks to Rob and our wonderful AV team for making sure we don't have to worry about the tech, which I am eternally grateful for. To all of our brilliant speakers today, I'm going to run through some of the thoughts I have and that I'm leaving with, but I think it's been a really, really open, to use a word we've just heard, curious day. I think open in terms of how everyone's listened, how everyone's shared, and the questions that have been asked. And my last thank you is to all of you for coming. We would be nothing without our audience and our participants, so thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Mirrors or Movers is always an inspiring day. This is my third year as part of the team, and I know we have some real veterans of the team here as well who'll probably echo my sentiment. But I think it is a day about asking questions and sitting with potentially uncomfortable truths, and I think that's definitely been true today. I think one key thing that's come through is that trust and media relevance is critical to democracy, economy, and security. But we have to innovate and we have to adapt. We've got to put integrity and reputable and rigorous processes at the heart of what we do, whether that's in terms of climate change, supply chain, AI, DE&I strategy. We need to face change and not run away from it. And I think, going back to that word we've sort of put in the theme, we need to think and understand what the bridges are that we need to build and the guardrails we need to put in place to help us find the right paths forward that bring everyone on that journey. I think technology has come up a lot today naturally, and I think technology, when understood and treated with care and diligence, is a tool that I think everyone is recognizing can be used to empower human creativity and really drive us forward in a positive way. But also, today is really often a place we talk about content, and I think as content producers, it's clear everyone also feels we need to help our audiences. We need to help them feel like the main character in the stories that we're telling, watching, and what they're reading. And also, crucially, we have to be open to learning from both sides, whether that is learning from your audience, older generations learning from younger generations, and younger generations learning from older ones. But I think the real message I'm taking home was one that Days put really beautifully, that we need to tread lightly on Earth and take care of what we love. There is no silver bullet to any of the challenges we've discussed today, but I think if we remain open and curious, the bridges will still be built, and hopefully we can find those ways to innovate and adapt over the coming years. Most importantly, I think we all need to laugh, and I think I'm never going to look at the Nando's periometer in the same way again. So thank you all for coming. It was wonderful to see you all, and looking forward to catching up with you after.